24 people were federally indicted for smuggling drugs and cell phones to gang members who were running a criminal enterprise from behind bars. The ringleader in that case, Tavon White, also accused of having sex with 4 corrections officers. In response, Martin O'Malley created a task force to cut down on the fraternization between inmates and staff.
They allegedly provided detainees with drugs and cell phones in exchange for money and sex. And now 3 correctional officers are facing federal charges.
It is the largest case ever filed in federal court here in our state. 80 people have been indicted in connection with a drug and contraband smuggling ring at the Eastern Correctional Institution in Somerset County.
Today, 15 people, including inmates and corrections officers, were indicted as part of a contraband conspiracy.
These incidents took place at the Roxbury Correctional Institute in Hagerstown and shows a sophisticated criminal network.
Maryland's prison system, like many across the United States, is meant to serve as both a deterrent and a rehabilitative tool for some of society's most dangerous individuals. But behind the razor wire and stone walls, several of the state's correctional institutions have become notorious for reasons that go far beyond confinement. Plagued by gang violence, corruption, overcrowding, and staff shortages, these prisons are not just places of punishment. They are volatile environments where survival often depends on power, affiliation, and control. From historic penitentiaries with centuries-old legacies of brutality to modern Supermax facilities still struggling with basic safety, the following prisons have earned reputations as the most dangerous in the state. Inmates and staff alike face constant risks, with riots, stabbings, deletion, and corruption making headlines year after year. These facilities don't just house danger. They reflect the deeper crises facing the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services as it grapples with how to maintain order in places that seem permanently on the edge of chaos.
Now new this morning, a 43-year-old prisoner stabbed to death at Jessup Correctional Institution. Police are telling the Sun that the inmate, John O'Sullivan, was found lying on the floor and bleeding by correctional officers around 10 o'clock Sunday morning. Officers had been responding to a fight. They say they saw several prisoners walking away from that victim. Those prisoners have now been taken into custody for questioning.
A man has been sentenced to 39 months in federal prison for racketeering at the Jessup Correctional Institution. 40-year-old Chaz Crisco conspired with former corrections officers, inmates, and people on the outside to smuggle in contraband that included narcotics, alcohol, tobacco, and cell phones.
A Baltimore County man gets 3 years in prison after being convicted of helping run a contraband smuggling operation at the Jessup Correctional Institution. Prosecutors say 40-year-old Chaz Crisco and a number of others bribed guards at that facility who smuggled drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and cell phones.
Maryland State Police say investigators are looking into the homicide of an inmate in Jessup. Police say 27-year-old Nicholas Del Fosse was serving time for burglary and pronounced dead yesterday afternoon.
A Jessup correctional inmate is now sentenced to 35 additional years in prison. His cellmate, 31-year-old Joseph Patrick Soule, was already serving a 30-year sentence for dealer stabbing him 66 times in 2014. Corrections officers say an object was blocking a window into the cell. Soule initially refused to move it, and when they entered the cell, they found his cellmate, David Stevenson, lying in a pool of blood.
Located in Jessup, Maryland, the current Jessup Correctional Institution stands on the grounds of what was once the infamous Maryland House of Correction, a prison so violent it earned the nickname the Cut. Originally opened in 1879, the House of Correction developed a brutal reputation over the decades, plagued by severe overcrowding, understaffing, and unrelenting inmate violence. It endured multiple riots, including a major uprising in 1972 during a wave of statewide prison unrest. One of its most shocking moments came in August 1979, when 30 inmates escaped by cutting through cell bars and perimeter fencing in one of the largest prison breaks in Maryland's history. Though all were eventually recaptured, the incident underscored the dangerous and chaotic conditions inside the facility. Violence wasn't limited to inmates. In July 2006, Officer David McGinn was brutally stabbed to death by inmates while on duty, a tragedy that prompted the state to shut down the aging and volatile prison in 2007. In its place now stands J.C.I. a modern maximum security institution meant to offer tighter control, but violence still lingers. The facility houses many of the state's most dangerous and long-term offenders, including high-ranking gang members. In 2016, I witnessed a deadly gang-related attack when members of the Aryan Brotherhood stabbed a rival gang leader from Dead Man Incorporated 54 times inside his cell, retaliating for an earlier dispute. The attack, caught on surveillance cameras, was a stark reminder of the deep-rooted gang presence within the prison. From its violent legacy as the Cut to its current status as a hotbed for organized gang activity, Jessup Correctional Institution remains one of the most dangerous prisons in Maryland.
Oh, it sure is. You know, not long ago, this jail made a lot of headlines. You'll remember that several dozen inmates and correctional officers were convicted in this huge corruption scheme. And at the time, then Governor Martin O'Malley vowed to root out corruption. Well, now the 11 News I-team has learned that current Governor Larry Hogan plans to shut this male detention center down sometime this summer. That announcement will come later today. We know that this jail was built back in 1859. It's the only jail in the country that's run by the state. The detention center currently houses 750 inmates. The facility's infrastructure is crumbling. It dates back before the Civil War. It was just 2 years ago, back in 2013, when 24 people were federally indicted for smuggling drugs and cell phones to gang members who were running a criminal enterprise from behind bars. The ringleader in that case, Tavon White, also accused of having sex with 4 corrections officers. In response, Martin O'Malley created a task force to cut down on the fraternization between inmates and staff. He also implemented new technology to keep the cell phones from working inside the jail. Now, the 11 News I-team has learned through sources that Governor Hogan planning to shut this place down.
For decades, the Baltimore City Detention Center stood as one of the most dangerous and chaotic jails in the country. Designed to hold pre-trial detainees, the facility was plagued by appalling conditions, extreme overcrowding, and unchecked violence. But by the early 2010s, things took a darker turn, not just due to inmate violence, but because of complete internal corruption. In 2013, a sweeping federal investigation revealed that the Black Guerrilla Family gang had effectively seized control of the jail from within. A total of 25 individuals, including 13 correctional officers, were indicted in a massive racketeering case. The gang's leader, Tavon White, was recorded on a wiretap claiming full control over the facility, boasting, "I make every final call in this jail, and nothing goes past me." Female correctional officers were accused of smuggling in drugs, cell phones, and tobacco, and some even became pregnant by inmates. Authorities estimated White alone made up to $15,000 a month from the contraband trade. What emerged was a picture of a jail transformed into a criminal enterprise, where gang members punished rivals, intimidated non-cooperative staff, and operated with virtual impunity. Meanwhile, basic infrastructure at Baltimore City Detention Center crumbled. Inmates were packed into deteriorating buildings with no air conditioning, leading to unbearable heat, unsanitary conditions, and constant tension. The jail saw countless stabbings, violent assaults, and security failures, including a high-profile escape where a detainee impersonated another inmate and simply walked out of the facility. The situation was so dire that in 2015, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan ordered the immediate closure of the men's detention center, calling it troubled and decrepit. However, even after its closure, the violence didn't end. Many of Baltimore City Detention Center detainees were moved to the Baltimore pretrial complex, where in August 2015, a riot erupted. Detainees barricaded themselves inside a housing unit and attacked responding officers, leaving 8 officers and 6 inmates injured. The collapse of Baltimore City Detention Center became a symbol of how deep gang control and systemic failure had become in Maryland's corrections system. Former inmates described the environment as a mix of oppressive boredom and sudden bursts of violence. Though its doors are now closed, the legacy of the Baltimore City Detention Center remains, a cautionary tale of what happens when corruption, neglect, and violence go unchecked behind the walls.
Prison inmate and a suspect has now been identified. State police say 28-year-old Robert Warren died Monday in his cell at the North Branch Correctional Institution in Cumberland.
State police are investigating the death of an inmate who was found unresponsive this weekend in his cell at a state prison in Allegheny County. The inmate is identified as 27-year-old Dominic Anderson. He was an inmate at the North Branch Correctional Institution in Cumberland. Police said during the evening of February the 23rd, a correctional officer was conducting cell checks and found Anderson lying on the floor of his cell where he was housed with another inmate.
North Branch Correctional Institution is Maryland's modern-day Supermax prison, constructed in 2003 to house the state's most dangerous and high-risk inmates under the tightest security possible. Designed to replace the notorious and outdated Jessup House of Correction, North Branch Correctional Institution was built with advanced surveillance systems and strict inmate management protocols. But despite its high-tech infrastructure, the facility has been plagued by severe violence, particularly against staff, and continues to face critical challenges tied to chronic understaffing. North Branch Correctional Institution holds some of the most violent offenders in Maryland, including lifers, gang leaders, and inmates with extensive histories of assault and disruption. According to the Prison Guards Union, assaults on correctional officers occur on an almost daily basis. Union representatives have long raised alarms about unsafe working conditions, citing dangerously low staffing levels and outdated infrastructure that make it difficult to maintain order. Tony Sines, a union president representing correctional officers in the region, has repeatedly warned that North Branch Correctional Institution is severely understaffed and that officers are being pushed into increasingly dangerous situations with little support. He described the facility as housing the most dangerous offenders the state has. One of the most serious recent incidents occurred in November 2024 when a single inmate managed to ambush multiple officers in a calculated attack. 2 correctional officers were stabbed and 2 others injured before staff regained control. One officer suffered a life-threatening neck wound and had to be airlifted to a trauma hospital, an incident that sent shockwaves through the correctional community. While all the injured officers survived, the attack raised serious concerns about staffing shortages and security protocols, even within a facility designed for maximum control. Inmate-on-inmate violence has also persisted within North Branch Correctional Institution walls. Although less publicized, stabbings, assaults, and gang-related attacks occur regularly, with rival gang members from organizations such as the Black Guerrilla Family, MS-13, and Aryan Brotherhood often confined within the same facility. Violent conflicts are inevitable. In 2013, an officer was stabbed by an inmate, triggering a shakeup in leadership. And in 2020, an inmate was found dead inside the facility in what investigators ruled a deletion. Yet another reminder that violence at North Branch Correctional Institution is not limited to clashes with staff. Despite its Supermax status and strict protocols, North Branch remains a powder keg. The combination of dangerous inmates, understaffing, and constant tension has made it one of the most perilous prison environments in Maryland. It was built to solve the problems of its predecessors, but in many ways, the North Branch Correctional Institution has inherited and magnified those same risks.
Maryland authorities over the weekend broke up an effort to deliver contraband into a prison using a drone.
Well, Jamie, fortunately, the prison staff and police both saw it coming before this drone could be launched. Its payload, drugs that were to be remotely dropped behind the fence. But this drone never made it off the ground. A brand new high-end top-dollar drone and remote with a payload of opiates in candy packaging and spice, all destined for special delivery.
Found in that vehicle were a drone which we believe was about to be used to deliver contraband into the Western Correctional Institute. Also in the vehicle was a handgun and various contraband.
Corrections officials say they had already developed information from both inside and outside the prison that such an attempt to fly contraband inside would occur in the weeks leading up to the bust.
It all happened at the Western Correctional Institution in Cumberland. According to police, Murray was serving a 9-year sentence since '07 for a drug conviction, a sentence the family says that ultimately took his life. For the family, all that's left are the memories, the letters, and photographs. Murray says they were told her brother, 30-year-old Darrell Murray, was found dead early Wednesday. But that, she says, was it. She only knew it was being investigated as a after her own online research.
2 Maryland prison workers are sent to the hospital after opening a letter that officials say was soaked in an unknown liquid. It happened at the Western Correctional Institution in Cumberland just after 10 yesterday morning. Authorities say a mailroom worker and correctional officer complained of irritation after opening that letter.
Western Correctional Institution, located in the rugged mountains of western Maryland, sits just next to North Branch Correctional Institution and shares much of its notoriety. Opened in the 1990s, Western Correctional Institution is a maximum security prison that houses a mix of medium and high security inmates, many of whom have been transferred from other facilities due to disciplinary issues. In practice, its inmate population is just as volatile and high risk as its neighbor, and the dangers inside are just as severe. One of the most pressing issues at Western Correctional Institution is a chronic staffing crisis. With a limited number of officers tasked with overseeing dangerous inmates, assaults and violent incidents have become alarmingly frequent. Union representatives have warned for years that the staffing levels are dangerously low, putting both officers and inmates at risk. Much like at North Branch, WCI correctional officers face regular attacks, and inmate-on-inmate violence is common in housing units, recreation yards, and other poorly supervised areas. The prison has seen several deadly incidents in recent years. In August 2024, a 23-year-old inmate named Marvin Brown was found dead in his cell with multiple puncture wounds, the apparent victim of a fatal attack by his cellmate. Authorities quickly launched a homicide investigation and identified another prisoner as the suspect. This was far from an isolated event. Other violent altercations have erupted in the outdoor yards, including one deadly incident where a group of inmates engaged in a brutal clash that resulted in another inmate's death. These events highlight the ongoing presence of gang conflicts within the prison. Rival groups often settle scores with homemade weapons in areas with minimal surveillance. Though Western Correctional Institution has not seen a major escape in recent years, there have been past security lapses that exposed vulnerabilities. Notably, a related incident from a nearby institution involved the 2006 deletion of Officer Jeffrey Roden, who was fatally shot during an inmate's escape attempt while at a hospital. That tragedy underscored systemic weaknesses in how dangerous inmates are supervised off-site, and similar risks persist across Western Maryland's correctional complexes. Inside Western Correctional Institution, contraband smuggling remains a problem, with some staff members suspected of aiding the flow of drugs and other banned items into the facility. Corruption concerns and understaffing have made it increasingly difficult to maintain order, especially as gang-affiliated inmates from urban centers like Baltimore and D.C. bring deep rivalries into the confined space. Former officers and inmates alike describe Western Correctional Institution as a pressure cooker, a remote, isolated facility filled with hardened individuals and staffed by a shrinking number of overworked guards. The prison's reputation for inmate deletions, brutal assaults, and dangerous instability has made it one of the most hazardous correctional institutions in Maryland.
For the last 3 years, multiple state and federal agencies have been investigating the smuggling ring at Eastern Correctional Institution.
What they involved was correctional officers taking bribes in return for bringing drugs, phones, and other contraband into the prison and providing those items to the inmates.
Officials say people on the outside would get the items to the COs. They would sneak the contraband past security in their hair, underwear, and internally. Then pass the narcotics, cell phones, porn videos, and other goods to the inmates who would distribute and sell them. Going rate for bringing a package inside the medium security prison was around $500, and the items were sold for a massive profit.
Maryland State Police are investigating after the death of a state prison inmate in Somerset County. On Friday night, the state police unit received a call from the Eastern Correctional Institution in reference to an inmate death. Investigators say 2 men were taken to the hospital. Alexander Christopher, who was an inmate serving time at the facility, was pronounced dead at the hospital.
Eastern Correctional Institution, Maryland's largest prison, is located in Somerset County on the state's rural eastern shore, far from the urban areas where many of its inmates originate. With a capacity exceeding 3,300 inmates, Eastern Correctional Institution operates primarily as a medium security facility, though it includes some maximum security sections. Despite its classification, Eastern Correctional Institution has become one of the most dangerous and corrupted prisons in the state, plagued by gang activity, staff misconduct, and widespread violence. In 2016, the prison's deep-rooted problems were exposed during a sweeping federal investigation. A massive racketeering scheme involving dozens of inmates, outside associates, and prison staff was uncovered, revealing the extent to which corruption had infiltrated the institution. In total, 80 individuals were indicted, including 18 correctional officers who were accused of accepting bribes and sexual favors in exchange for smuggling drugs, cell phones, tobacco, and other contraband into the prison. This illicit pipeline allowed gangs to operate freely behind bars, coordinating drug sales, enforcing discipline, and carrying out retaliatory attacks. The investigation painted a grim picture of Eastern Correctional Institution as a prison where gang members, particularly those from groups like the Black Guerrilla Family and MS-13, used corrupt officers to turn the facility into a lucrative criminal enterprise. Contraband cell phones, in particular, empowered gang leaders to run operations from within their cells, leading to internal assaults and orchestrated violence both inside and outside the prison walls. In June 2024, a 49-year-old inmate named John Stanford was found deleted in his cell, one of several deletions that have occurred in recent years. In 2022, 2 inmates died on the same night under suspicious circumstances, triggering another investigation into possible foul play. Other inmates have suffered severe stab wounds during disputes in housing units, and fights frequently erupt in the prison's yard and dormitories, often the result of simmering gang rivalries. The facility's remote location has only worsened its problems. Persistent staffing shortages have left areas of the prison undersupervised, making it easier for gangs to operate unchecked. Families of correctional officers have staged public protests to demand better staffing levels and safer working conditions. Despite state promises to reform the institution following the 2016 scandal, the cycle of contraband, corruption, and violence has proven incredibly difficult to break. Although Eastern Correctional Institution is classified as medium security, its size, gang saturation, history of internal corruption, and inability to maintain consistent control have made it one of the most dangerous prisons in Maryland, both for the people who work there and those confined behind its walls.
Well, today, 15 people, including inmates and corrections officers, were indicted as part of a contraband conspiracy.
These incidents took place at the Roxbury Correctional Institute in Hagerstown and shows a sophisticated criminal network.
15 indictments for 3 separate contraband conspiracies, all allegedly happening at the Roxbury Correctional Institute in Hagerstown. In one case, investigators revealed that an inmate, Jose Tapia, recruited 2 civilians, Sky Austin Jr. and Maya Scott, through Instagram to operate drones to deliver contraband. Second conspiracy, dietary corrections officer Tamil Ashby allegedly smuggled drugs to inmate Jamal Brown, who was also assigned to work in the prison kitchen.
She was an employee from another region who abused her role as a protector of the incarcerated population while doing overtime here at Roxbury.
When she arrived for an overtime shift at the facility, officers say they found 158 strips of Suboxone hidden within her uniform. That was to be sold for $100 per strip inside the prison.
Update in Washington County, 2 additional correctional officers have now been arrested in an ongoing investigation at the Roxbury prison near Hagerstown, Maryland. Corrections officers Julie Chatterton and Monica Shields were charged with felony possession of meth with intent to distribute. The investigation found illegal substances were entering the prison through a drone. 14 people were arrested last month, including 1 other corrections officer.
Roxbury Correctional Institution in Hagerstown is a medium security prison with a notorious reputation for violence, scandal, and deep-rooted systemic issues. While it may not carry the Supermax label, Roxbury Correctional Institution has been home to some of the most shocking and disturbing incidents in Maryland's correctional history. Incidents that have exposed major flaws in both security and oversight. One of the most tragic events occurred in 2006 when correctional officer Jeffrey Roden was deleting while guarding an inmate at a local hospital. The prisoner, Brandon Morris, managed to overpower Officer Roden, take his service weapon, and fatally shoot him in the face during an attempted escape. After fleeing the hospital, Morris carjacked a vehicle but was quickly recaptured. The incident sent shockwaves through the Maryland prison system. Roden's death marked the first time in over 2 decades that a correctional officer in the state had been deleted in the line of duty. It also revealed glaring security failures, such as leaving a single officer to guard a high-risk inmate with insufficient restraints in a public setting. Just 2 years later, the institution made headlines again, but this time, it wasn't an inmate committing violence, it was the staff. In 2008, an inmate named Kenneth Davis was brutally beaten in a coordinated assault by at least a dozen correctional officers spanning multiple shifts. The attacks were allegedly carried out as revenge for an earlier incident in which Davis had punched a guard. The beatings were severe enough to send Davis to the hospital, and federal prosecutors later revealed that officers conspired to cover up the assaults. A lieutenant was even accused of destroying surveillance footage and coaching others to lie during the investigation. Eventually, 9 officers were indicted on federal civil rights charges, exposing a disturbing culture of abuse where some staff members acted more like a violent gang than correctional professionals. These 2 incidents, the deletion of an officer by an inmate and the brutal retaliation against an inmate by staff, define Roxbury Correctional Institution legacy of danger and dysfunction. They also illustrate that the threats inside prison walls can come from either side of the bars. Beyond these headline cases, Roxbury has continued to struggle with inmate-on-inmate violence, gang activity, and tensions between inmates from different regions. It houses members of several major gangs, including the Black Guerrilla Family and Dead Man Incorporated, and occasional flare-ups between urban and rural factions have led to fights and lockdowns. Part of a trio of state prisons clustered near Hagerstown, once known informally as Riot Alley, Roxbury stands out not just for the brutality it has witnessed, but for how those events have highlighted the blurred line between those incarcerated and those in charge.
They allegedly provided detainees with drugs and cell phones in exchange for money and sex, and now 3 correctional officers are facing federal charges. What allegedly happened over a 4-year period here at the Chesapeake Detention Facility on East Madison Street is reminiscent of the smuggling operation ran by the Black Guerrilla Family, which shocked the city 7 years ago.
The correctional officers charged in this indictment allegedly were able to bring contraband into CDF, even though they were subject to security screenings, by hiding it on their persons, in their clothing, and in bags or containers of food.
Drugs, cell phones, chargers, and tobacco, all in exchange for money and more.
Some of the correctional officers allegedly engaged in improper relationships with detainees, including sexual relationships.
The 3 correctional officers allegedly worked through facilitators outside the prison, and detainees acted as wholesalers, selling the drugs on the inside at a huge profit.
They bragged about
Chesapeake Detention Facility, Formerly known as the Maryland Correctional Adjustment Center and often referred to as Supermax, was designed to house Maryland's most dangerous inmates under near solitary lockdown. Located in Baltimore, the facility was built with maximum security in mind, holding federal pretrial detainees and high-ranking gang leaders who posed a serious risk to staff, other inmates, and public safety. But despite its strict security protocols, Chesapeake Detention Facility has proven far from immune to the same issues that plague other Maryland prisons. One of the most shocking incidents occurred in 2010, when a convicted criminal named Raymond Taylor walked right out of the Supermax by impersonating another inmate. Brought in for a court appearance, Taylor was placed in a holding cell with a detainee serving a short sentence. When the other inmate's name was called for release, Taylor stepped forward, presented the inmate's ID, and managed to fool multiple officers before being released through the front door. Hours passed before staff realized the real inmate was still locked up. By then, Taylor had fled the city. He was eventually captured the next day, but the incident revealed troubling procedural lapses at a facility touted as escape-proof. Beyond escapes, the prison has also dealt with gang violence and internal unrest, even with detainees confined to their cells 23 hours a day. Many of the inmates at CDF are awaiting federal trials, including members of high-profile gangs such as MS-13 and the Black Guerrilla Family. While large-scale riots are rare due to the facility structure, violence still finds its way in through attacks during limited recreation and through disturbing tactics like inmates throwing bodily fluids at staff. Perhaps more alarming is the corruption among correctional officers. In 2021, 2 officers were charged with participating in a contraband smuggling scheme. Investigators discovered that the officers had accepted bribes and even maintained personal relationships with detainees in exchange for bringing in drugs, tobacco, cell phones, and other banned items. In one case, an officer even delivered liquor as a birthday gift to a gang-affiliated inmate. These breaches gave inmates access to narcotics and unmonitored communication devices, which not only compromised the safety of the facility, but also allowed gangs to continue coordinating criminal activity from behind bars. Though it houses fewer inmates than larger institutions like Jessup or ECI, the profile of Chesapeake's population, violent, high-level gang members, and federal defendants, makes it a uniquely volatile environment. The facility was built to impose complete control, but incidents like successful escape attempts and internal corruption have proven that no level of security is foolproof. Chesapeake Detention Facility stands as a stark reminder that even the most fortified correctional settings can become battlegrounds for organized crime and systemic failure. It remains one of the most dangerous and unpredictable places of confinement in Maryland. The dangers outlined across Maryland's most notorious prisons aren't isolated, they're systemic. Whether it's a gang leader running an empire from behind bars, a correctional officer being stabbed during a shift, or inmates taking control of dormitories in riots, these events expose a correctional infrastructure under immense strain. Chronic understaffing, outdated facilities, and widespread corruption have created the perfect storm for violence to flourish, often unchecked. Reform efforts have come and gone, yet the core issues persist. In many of these prisons, the threat doesn't just come from the inmates, it's also embedded in the culture, leadership gaps, and operational breakdowns that allow criminal enterprises to thrive behind bars. For Maryland's justice system to move forward, it must address these problems not just with policy, but with commitment, ensuring that safety, accountability, and true rehabilitation are possible for those on both sides of the prison gates. Until then, the names on this list will remain etched in the state's correctional history as warnings and reminders of just how dangerous life behind the walls can be.